Okay, everybody. So welcome to our dedicated live stream. We're going to talk about the events recently that have happened and caught, well, a lot of us at least, off guard concerning the 3-foot model. I have Roger with me today, and two of us will be bantering back and forth with several of you as we go through it. What I'd like to do is before we get into the story at large, there's a couple of things that I wanted to do sort of housekeeping wise here. And that is this live stream actually preempted a supporter event that normally happens on a monthly basis for patrons. And I apologize to the patrons that are on the live stream today. This was normally something that's dedicated to you guys. However, I think everybody can pretty much agree that I think that today's value is pretty significant. So I wanted to let everybody know that and explain that. The second thing I want to do is there is a scrolling banner at the bottom of the screen. And I want everybody to sear those words into their mind. We must remember that what we are talking about today is the complaint that the buyers have lodged against Heritage Auctions. It is an alleged complaint about alleged fraud. Okay, we're only hearing one side of the story at this point, but you and I both know it's going to be months, if ever, before we hear both sides of the story. So I think it's important that we take a look at things and begin to discuss what we know. So I'm going to begin with the article that was brought to my attention by one of you out here in my viewing land. Thank you. That brought my attention to the lawsuit. Then what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit briefly after we talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit about, and we'll probably go directly to the complaint after that, I think. I have the actual documents that were filed with the city of Los Angeles, and they give us some very interesting information. Obviously, they're going to tell us what the buyers or the sellers say Heritage did wrong. Interesting. Okay. Anecdotal. Okay. But it's going to give us the timeline. We've wanted to know what happened after that eBay auction went down. Who was talking to whom? Where was the model? What were the next plans? And we were given silence until sometime in January, I think, when an update was done that said, hey, we're evaluating it now. And then right around April 18th or so, we get the press release from Heritage Auctions. And oh, by the way, Roddenberry now has possession of the model and everybody's happy and we're moving forward. And then 2.5 weeks later, we get this. So it's really going to give us visibility into the activities that happened, because the dates of the activities and what was done are not in dispute. It is only the intentions of some of the people in the dispute. Now, I also want to point out, and you will see that when we go through the complaint, no one is alleging that Roddenberry Enterprises did anything wrong at all. The sellers were very explicit even in the complaint, and I'm sure we'll see that as we scroll through it, in pointing out right up front that they do not believe there's any, that they hold Rod and Roddenberry Enterprises completely blameless. This was not a conspiracy. This wasn't an intent to defraud or to rip them off or to deny them, whatever they felt should be theirs. They do not believe there's any malfeasance whatsoever with Roddenberry Enterprises. Now, where this is going to play in, ironically, isn't mentioned in the complaint, but is mentioned in wherever side, I can't keep track of it, is that it's in this Los Angeles Times article we're going to take a look at, because there may be some deflection from Heritage to Roddenberry Enterprises. And I'm basing that solely on a public statement made in this article by the sellers, not by anything that we can find on any supporting paperwork. But it explains a bit, in my opinion, as to why there are comments in the body of the complaint itself that said, hey, this is not Rod's issue. So what basically happens is on May 7th, this lawsuit was filed in Los Angeles. And the story, as we can see here, I'm going to scroll over here, so bear with me for a second while I make sure my pointer, there we go, mouse is on the right window so I can scroll it down there. We're all familiar with the photograph. Okay, I do want to talk about something real quick before we go on the photograph here. Several people have asked over multiple videos, Jim, why didn't you mention the base? The wood grain is a thumbprint. Why isn't anyone jumping up and down and screaming at the top of their lungs during this entire process that the wood grain is your authentication? And I can't tell you why the professional people did not mention the wood grain. I don't know why. All the other people who were involved didn't comment publicly on the wood grain, but I can tell you why I didn't. And why I think, and I believe the reason that I didn't could possibly feed their reasoning too. But hey, this is just my take on the matter. And that is that base could have been authentic and the model not. And let me explain to you the scenario that I'm talking about. When we saw the base, attached to the bottom of the base is a business card attached with yellowing cellophane from Robert Dayton. Right? Yeah, Robert Dayton. So let's say I buy a storage container, or I'm at a yard sale, or whatever, I don't know, a flea market. And there's this base, and I buy it because, hey, it's neat. It's got the little microphone, thing on it, so I can make an adjustment. And then, I buy it and I flip it over, and it's like, oh my God, this has got Dayton's name on it. So I go searching. And it's like, okay, first off, it's probably still at that point would have still had the little plaque there, which was not there when Roddenberry had it. Okay. But very quickly you'd go, wait a minute, this base is an amazing find. But because there was nothing on the base, it went from being an almost priceless find to an amazing find.
Right.
So theoretically, someone could have decided, well, you know what? It needs a model. So here we go. If you look at the condition of the model, it's in really bad shape. We know that the dorsal is all messed up. You can clearly see where the support struts coming out of the secondary hull into the nacelles have been separated from both the nacelles and the secondary hull, and it looks like somebody very, very crudely tried to epoxy them back in. Okay, so the point is, authenticating the base did nothing. They had to authenticate the model. If you authenticate the model, the base is no longer an issue. But if you authenticated the base, you would still have to authenticate the model, because you and I both know that even though the odds of somebody finding the base without that model and reconstructing what we see here are probably billions to one, maybe even more than that. But when you're dealing with an artifact that is almost certainly priceless, and that's a word, by the way, that was uttered by Heritage Auctions in their press release. When you're dealing with a model that's almost priceless, there's no way you could leave it go with the base. You would have to do the model. And once you do the model, the base is pointless.
Yep.
All right. So let's go. I was reminded of that when I saw the little wooden base here. But moving on through the rest of the article here, Heritage Auctions back in April. There's the picture of Rod and Joe Magdalena, who are named in the complaint. Rod, of course, is held harmless. Interestingly enough, this photograph was required by their settlement agreement that they had signed with the sellers. We're going to see that further on. This photograph was definitely staged for publicity reasons, that there must be a photograph of Joe and Rod and the model. All right. But anyhow, The journey was far from smooth. The Starship model and its celebrated return is now the subject of a lawsuit alleging fraud, negligence, and deceptive trade practice, highlighting the enduring value of memorabilia from the iconic Star Trek with the iconic sci-fi television series. I do not wish to get involved in discussions in this call about the potential behavior of heritage auctions when we're not discussing this particular transaction. I recognize that out there in Star Trek land, there are people that have questioned authentications and valuations before. I'm not going to go there. They are the recognized industry leaders. I may not like them, and I actually don't dislike them. I have nothing against them. I'd love to meet them. But at the same time, I recognize there's a reason why everybody goes to them. So I just want to point out to that even though we might have people who are complaining about authentications done on phasers and other props in the past who have insisted that they were always fraudulent, we're not going to go there simply because that's not pertaining to this. And this comment is mostly not for the folks that are joining me on the live stream today, but for comments that might be left to this video online afterwards.
Right.
Okay, the case was bought by Dustin Raich and Jason Rivas, and I apologize. As most of you know, I'm not really good with names. So if I've murdered those names, Dustin and Jason, I apologize. Longtime friends and self-described storage unit entrepreneurs who discovered the model in a storage locker auction. It's the first time we knew the names of the sellers. I knew their names on eBay. I didn't really want to spread that, but anybody who had a screenshot of the eBay listing, and I think my earliest video even did, it told you right there, their eBay name at the very least. And interestingly enough, Dustin has been doing this for so long. He's actually been featured in Storage Wars on at least one occasion. Let me back that out. I haven't seen the episode. I can't say he was featured in Storage Wars. He was in one or more Storage Wars because he buys these things in Hollywood all the time. All right. So interestingly enough, the attorney for this lawsuit says it's an unfortunate misunderstanding. We have a seller on one side and a buyer on the other side, and Heritage is in the middle, and we are aligning the parties on both sides to get the transaction complete. This is not the lawyer. I'm sorry. This is the lawyer for Heritage. This is not the lawyer for the buyers, or sellers. Notice the lawyers instantly going, hey, I'm the middle guy here. This is a misunderstanding between Rod and the sellers. No, it's not. But hey, when we hear the actual response that comes from our friends at Heritage, and when that response is in the public, and I can get it through court records, we'll do another one of these, and we'll follow right back up with the exact same thing, but from their point of view. Right. But the complaints very specifically says, no. The complaint has nothing to do with REI, and they're not named.
Right.
The pair claim the model was authenticated and given a valuation of $800,000. They agreed to consign it to an auction sale with Heritage for July. However, following the agreement, they alleged the auction house falsely questioned their title on the model and convinced them that instead of taking it to auction, where they would get roughly $800,000 for it, to sell it to Roddenberry for $500,000, which was a lowball price. And they were told, you really want to do this because he has clear legal title and they can keep you locked up for years in litigation. Okay, statements you don't really want your agent to be telling you when you're entering into a transaction, and statements which they maintain are factually unenforceable. And I think everybody kind of agrees that the whole concept of it being stolen property, we all know it was stolen. And we have that letter from 1979 that he sent, that Gene sent Jeffrey Katzenberg. But there's, the real thing is the model belonged to Desilu. It didn't belong to Gene.
Right.
So if you really want to get picky, where is the chain of provenance that showed that Desilu gave it to Gene? Okay. This is splitting hairs. I normally wouldn't split hairs, but we're talking about a priceless artifact here. Lawyers will split hairs.
Yep.
All right. So The response from the lawyers of the sellers, they think we have a disagreement with Roddenberry. We don't. We think they violated property law and the discharge of their fiduciary duties. So we're already seeing the man in the middle thing here. Not going to spend a whole lot more time on that. I do want to say one thing that I thought was really interesting. Some of you might remember that when the story first broke, I found a quote out on the internet by a couple people that brought up the name Barton Holmes, and that the locker belonged to Barton Holmes. And when I tried to track that down, including tracking down the person who made the public statement that I showed their clip, they indicated that, okay, that particular post they made was actually an amalgamation of several pieces of information they had found out or been told, but they didn't really delineate, nor could they clearly remember where it came from. In other words, no one was able to authenticate the Barton Holmes comment. When I researched Barton Holmes in that earliest video, I discovered he was a Hollywood filmmaker of very, very important rank in Hollywood, and that he was in Hollywood and at the height of his popularity around 1913. So Mr. Holmes obviously had nothing to do with this model whatsoever, but he is mainly known for a significant body of documentary and other films that were made back between the 1890s and the early 1900s, and a large body of his work vanished. And back in 2004, at another storage lot auction, a bunch of his films showed up. So the question was, well, that's interesting. So this isn't the first time a lost Hollywood item has shown up associated with maybe the estate of Barton Holmes. Not really sure. But notice to take a look at this second paragraph, or the first complete one on the screen. There were tins of old photographs and negatives of nitrate films from the 1800s and 1900s. When Rebus unwrapped the trash bag that was sitting on top of furniture, he pulled out the model of a starship. The business card of its maker, Richard C. Dayton, was affixed to the bottom of the base. A Google search turned up that Dayton had made Star Trek models, but the two did not make the connection to the series or which model it was. Dudes, you need to learn how to Google better. That just blows my mind. Yep. But they have absolutely no reason whatsoever to make that up. But really, if your business is placing lost and found things in storage containers, and you actually track down that Richard Dayton made Star Trek models, but then just went, oh, okay, I think we can get $1,000 for this and stick it up on eBay. I hope this has taught you a research skill. All right. We buy lots of units, see models all the time. They stuck it up on eBay for $1,000. Now they're going to talk a little bit about Star Trek. We're going to skip through that. Now it's talking about Roddenberry reporting Jeffrey Katzenberg that the model was missing in 1979. To this day, we don't know who he gave it to. My personal belief is it did go to Robert Abel or somebody in his team, but they were never able to prove that. Also, they gave the Smithsonian D7, not the Poe one, the Roddenberry model. They loaned it to Robert Abel and Company when Robert Abel and Company were doing the original effects for In Thy Image, the TV series, or Star Trek the Motion Picture before they burned all their bridges. And the first thing that they did was they disassembled all the pieces because they needed to build pyrotechnic versions that could blow up. So they just disassembled everything. And when they gave it back to the Smithsonian, they gave it to them in pieces. Yep. I find that very fascinating, and also a coincidence that there's every indication that this model was disassembled and then hastily put back together again. I would believe it's very likely that they had it, they pulled it apart, and they didn't reassemble it. When they were done with it or whatever happened to it, they left it in the same condition that the D7 was left in. Here you go. Here's a box of parts. And then somebody else went, oh, wow. And they put this together, and they got the little nameplate that they could attach to the base, and it was obviously on display for somebody for a period of time. But the behavior of Robert Abel with the D7, in my opinion, matches some of the physical circumstantial evidence we see in this model.
Right. Agreed.
Nothing that we've seen right now is going to help us understand exactly what happened, who had it, and why it had not been returned. All right, so they're going to go back and forth here. Before I leave it, because we're going to go into the complaint here in a second, because I think the rest of this is going to give us information that we get much better here in a moment. It does point out a few things as of 10 days ago. And that is, one, they've never received a penny for this, which contractually they should have. That's blatantly obvious in this complaint. And the attachments we actually have, by the way, in this complaint, and I'll show you, we have the bill of sale, we have the consignment agreement, we have all the paperwork that surrounds this, which nothing in the paperwork is contested. It's there, but it's given there as in support of their arguments. Right here, Joe Magdalena, Heritage's executive vice president, made public statements calling it priceless. This was around April 18th when we saw the photograph that Gary Kerr and Doug Drexler and really the whole world saw. It showed up in the newspaper that day, I think Los Angeles Times. It could sell for any amount, and I wouldn't be surprised because of what it is. He told the Associated Press that day, it is truly a cultural icon. Okay, so I'm going to make one other pit stop before we go anywhere, before we go into the complaint. I'm going to show you another article. The correct one, if I click on it right. Sooner or later, give me a chance. Here we go. I really want to bring out something here. In October of 2023, Heritage Auctions, Joe Magdalena, found a box while helping Greg Jane's family. They found a box, and in the box, they discovered an X-Wing. An X-Wing that apparently nobody knew existed. How Greg would have an X-Wing in his garage for all these years and not know it, God only knows. But the belief is that because he worked on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was done by a lot of the same, at the same time, 77, that he obtained this as part of what he brought with him when he was done with that. He just never opened it, I guess, as crazy as that sounds. But the point I want to make here is $3.1 million, guys. $3.1 million sold in October for an X-Wing. Joe Magdalena, his comment to Associated Press, he knew it, and he's right. This thing is priceless. And if there's anybody listening to my live stream today who believes this thing would not have sold far in excess of $1 million, this is the very first Enterprise ever made, not counting not counting the 4-inch balsa model. Well, $1 million is not what this model would have gone for. Absolutely not. It would have gone for a heck of a lot more than that. If the X-Wing went for 3.1, with the publicity that's associated around this, the sky is the limit.
Yep.
But I wanted to show you this for a couple of things. One, I wanted to show you that, yes, Joe Magdalena and Heritage Auctions are recognized leaders in the industry. They did the Greg Jane auction. They were called on to authenticate this piece or to arrange to have this piece authenticated. They sold it or whatever. That's why I even agree with the sellers reaching out to Heritage. What the sellers didn't do correctly is something that I had recommended in my videos, because in all honesty, I thought everybody would do. Dude, you find a lottery ticket that's worth more than 10 grand, the first thing you call is a lawyer. You don't call anything else. There are tax implications. There may be criminal implications. God only knows what you're getting yourself into. So the fact that they actually went as far as to get this to our friends in heritage auctions and sign a consignment agreement and accept an appraised value without talking to a lawyer is crazy, But then again, that's maybe the same kind of depth of detail that we saw with they Googled Richard Dayton, saw Star Trek, and gave up on it.
Yep.
All right. So what I'm going to do, we're getting ready to move into the complaint. So Roger, I'm going to let you speak for a few minutes on your thoughts on this, because I've been running my mouth unendingly since the beginning. And then while you're doing that, I'm going to scroll back through the comments, because before we get into the complaints, I want to respond to some of the comments or answer some of the questions that I might have answers to.
Sure.
So give my mouth a little bit of a time, on my throat to heal up, and then we'll pick it up on the other side of that. So
sounds great. I totally agree, Jim. The base clinched it for me, but then again, when you stop and think about it, you're absolutely right. Nobody's questioning the authenticity of the base itself, especially with Richard Dayton's card cellophane taped to the bottom of it. I think that pretty much clinches it, that it's the original base. What I hadn't thought about, and you mentioned during the video, was the fact that it was, and we've seen it, hastily glued back together with epoxy. I hadn't thought of that angle, where maybe, that is a pointer to the possibility that it could have been with the folks that took the Klingon battle cruiser apart, and then left it in pieces and shipped it back in a box, basically, to the Smithsonian. So that's an interesting point that I had not thought about, and that makes it does seem like that could be a viable possibility as to where it came from. The other thing is, you see it on television reality shows nowadays, where Curse of Oak Island's the one that comes up to mind, where they'll take objects and date them. They'll date them, whether that could be done with a small chip of paint from this model. Can they forensically detail that and date that back to, 1964, or even a slight chunk of the wood or a flake of the wood or something to that effect, where they could forensically date that. Those 2 points, to me, need to be included in the forensic detailing of this model, to find out for sure whether it could be and is actually the original model. I think you're absolutely right. I think for somebody to go to those lengths to create basically a copy or a fake version of this are pretty highly unlikely, but it's within the realm of possibility. And for something that could go, easily for multi-million dollars, millions of dollars on the market, I think those kind of details need to be hashed out before that could be done. So before it goes for sale. But honestly, and I shared this with Jim before, of all the original models from the original series, I thought, honestly, when this story first broke, where it was found and how it was found, I thought, no, this is too easy. There's got to be more backstory to this. There's got to be some kind of controversy involved with just them, the sellers, relinquishing this model, and then, basically either giving it to or selling it to Roddenberry for what seems to me a trivial amount of money, even though $500,000 is a lot of money. But no, I thought it would be well more than that, multi-million dollars. So I thought it was odd that this model would go through a sale to Roddenberry without some kind of something to throwing a monkey wrench into the works. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. I mean, I'm looking at some of the messages that are popping up. Some of those.
Okay. So what we're going to get ready to move into the complaint, but I will address a couple of things that were said in the comments. The sequence of events, and the complaint's going to lay these out for us very clearly. But the October 27th, 23rd or 27th, but we'll know exactly here. They buy the storage unit. November 2nd, roughly, is when the auction goes up and gets pulled down. Then it went into a black box until we heard that they were in fact authenticating it. It was on its way back. We were told it was in the process of being returned to its rightful. Everything we were told wasn't true. Okay, but we weren't lied to. I don't want anybody to think that because Personality X said this, it was a lie. That was not the case. It just turns out now that we find out in the complaint that there are signatures by both parties on documents that show the true timelines. So my guess is that this, like anything else, is one of those things that nobody really wanted to discuss or go on the record with until it was a done deal. And that's why everything, like broke free on April 1st. And you're actually going to see a little bit of a reference to why the month of April was so important when we go through this thing. I do want to talk about, and because Geek Filter is bringing up a very strong belief, and I've heard this belief from other people as well, that they've observed that in their opinion, the bases don't match. And I've heard that more than once. I've seen things that look like they match to me, but I'm not an expert. I am nowhere near an expert. But I also know that the noise on the internet over the past few months has been, there it is. There's the key. It's right there. You can see it. It's the one. And of course, nobody was going to talk officially about the base. But Geek's concern is the main reason. It's the main reason why I said, forget the base.
Right.
No matter what, you authenticate the model, the base must then be true, whether you want it to be or not. And if it's not, if the base is an after effect, doesn't matter. It's the model that has the value. So obviously, there were people who felt both ways.
Yep.
In my opinion, it matched. But hey, I am not an expert. There are some photographs that were placed, I believe, on Trek BBS that I referenced in one of the earlier videos, where people had done some pretty high resolution comparisons, and they were also convinced it matched, which I think is why most people were wondering, why isn't anybody talking about this other than the fans? Okay. Okay. So yeah, I think, and Geek just brings up, the base could have been swapped. I think the concern was people saying the base was exactly the same. Then surely the ship was, as you know, it's not true. And right. That's correct. I mean, the base has been modified. The plaque was not there. Or actually, you know what? There's a photograph of it sitting on Gene's desk where from the angle, it looks like the plaque might have been there. But because the picture's in black and white, there's no relief on the plate. So it looks like, okay, there might be something where that plate is. There might be an artifact in there somewhere, but not anything that we could positively identify. Jim Jam, my theory, let me show that to you guys while I'm reading this. My theory is Gene leans into the phase 2 model shop. Guy in the model shop pays Gene for the model. Model disappears. Gene secretly raises no fuss. Ultimately, the model still belongs to the studio. Okay, so really good point there. Okay, Jim Jam just brought up something. To say that Rod has clear, proven legal title to the model,
right,
has not been established yet.
That's right.
The model belonged to the studio. At least one other person in the comments said, hey, if I were the studio and this got up, I just would have lawyered up and slapped them and, hey, problem done. Paramount can do that. Yep. CBS can do that. CBS is the only one in this story who has a receipt for having the model built.
Right.
The receipt was made out to Desi Liu. It was not made out to Gene Roddenberry. Yep. So that's why I think that's the sticky part on the stolen product thing that I think everyone wants to avoid. Because while Gene and Majel were quite public about saying over and over again through the years, it's stolen, it's stolen, it's stolen, Rod's never used that phrase that I've seen. Even before it was found, Rod just never went in the direction that they did about it being stolen, because he probably never crossed his mind, and it was water under the bridge. It was gone, and away it goes. So, although possession's 9/10 of the law, the adjustment auction shows up to the captain's chair in the helm, so the things left the studio and were given to people in the studios never asserted ownership before. So I think you can see where I'm going with this. If the studio tried to assert ownership but had not asserted ownership on other things, lawyers are going to have a field day. So anytime we talk about the provenance of stolen property, I also want to bring up the law on stolen property because a lot of people are mistaken on this. Okay. It is illegal to sell a stolen item. You take a stolen item into a pawn shop and you sell it and it's stolen. The cops can charge you. It is not illegal to own a stolen product. Okay, because if you didn't know it was stolen and you discover it was stolen, and the world knows now that you have a stolen product, you give it back. It gets seized. Okay, if somebody steals the Mona Lisa, then if it gets found and they're not trying to sell it, it'll get seized and returned back. How do I know this? Just look at how we have handled all of the recovery of the French treasures that the Nazis took during World War II. The international law is very specific here. So, no, these buyers would never have gone to jail or were never in any legal wrong for anything they did. Anything they did. Because as we go through this complaint, you're going to see they didn't even sell it, period. Right. All right. So, theoretically, the auction company or the storage company broke a law. Now they'll say we didn't know, and I agree with them. How the heck could they have known what's inside of it? However, that's the way the law works. So no, you can't really blame say the sellers broke any laws. Right. So let's jump into the complaint, shall we? I think that I really want to step through this. I think you guys are going to be fascinated by this look inside something that, quite frankly, we don't normally get to see. If Jim can find the right button to click. Show on stream. There we go. All right. So this is like 36. This is 46 pages long. We are not going to read this whole thing. I don't want to have people starving to death or dying of dehydration by the time we get through it. But we're going to scan through it. Roger and I have been through this. Yep. And we're going to pick some of the high parts here. And then I can cruise back through it again in response to the questions that you have here. Yep. All right. So one of the things that Roger and I really noticed earlier this week that was pretty interesting is introduction. Generations recognize the whoosh of Star Trek Starship Enterprise in the opening and during many scenes. This incredible work was done with an intricately made model, the work of art from the early days of sci-fi as a genre. The here and after quote unquote Starship was lost by loan to another filmmaker friend in or about 1979, becoming a Trekkie mystery until 2023 when the plaintiffs bought it sight unseen in a self-storage lien sale. And to answer your question, Geek, I think the sheet that I have at the bottom here is going to tell you exactly which place it was that actually had this. The Starship was a once-in-a-lifetime find of extraordinary value. No kidding. The plaintiffs retained the famed Heritage Auction House to promote and sell the Starship only, and this is their allegation, only to have Heritage ignore its fiduciary duties to the plaintiffs in order to advance its own interest by currying favor with Hollywood royalty and creating PR for itself. All right. It's telling us a little bit about the two men that bought it. I'm going to skip right through there because, in all honesty, it doesn't really matter. And then this section 3 identifies Heritage and puts them on a level with Sotheby's or Christie's, which I would probably beg to differ. But when you look at the amount of money they moved just for Greg's auction alone, they are definitely heavyweights. They are probably right now maybe the leading auction house in the United States for distributing or for auctioning off entertainment memorabilia. If somebody knows that to be untrue or even true, let me know. Leave a comment, leave a shout out here. But my belief is that. Now, here is something that is interesting here because you're going to hear this name all throughout the complaint. And I've never heard this name before. Defendant named in the allegation, Brian Chains, they call him from hereafter referred to just as Chains, is a Hollywood memorabilia expert handling iconic props, costumes, and related memorabilia. A Star Trek authority, Chains is consignment director for Heritage at the Heritage Beverly Hills office. Chains signed Rach up for the consignment agreement, functioning as their trusted appraiser and confidant in the transaction at issue herein. And what occurred to me when I saw this is, for those of you who watch Pawn Stars, to me, Chains is Chum Lee. Okay. So for me, I would not accept that name is from somebody who is an acknowledged expert in the field of Hollywood memorabilia. He was the guy who sold the consignment. Okay. Not saying he doesn't know what he's talking about, but, and they're actually going to talk about this in this complaint, the expert here really is Joe Magdalena. It's not Chains. Okay. And so I just want to bring that out. People are throwing Chains' name around as a result of this being named in the complaint. And I'm not really sure that his culpability is evident anywhere. I mean, if I were him right now, I'd probably have a miserable job until this gets settled one way or the other. All right. I do want to point out something that I was not able to identify. Paragraph 5, the true names and capacity of defendants named herein as Does 1 through 25 inclusive, whether individual, corporate, associate, or otherwise, are unknown to the plaintiff, who therefore sues such defendants by fictitious names pursuant to California Code of Civil Procedure, blah, blah, blah. Plaintiff will amend this complaint to show such true names and capacities when they've been determined. 25 roles have been identified in this lawsuit that are deemed to be culpable. That's what this is telling us. It does not have to be, unfortunately, and I'm not saying it does not have to be, I'm sorry. It does not give us what those are, and I cannot find a list in any of the appendixes that we're going to see, or the exhibits as we go through this. I could not find a document listing who those John Does 1 through 25 are. It is conceivably possible that this statement alone serves to reserve those 25 Does, and then you would amend in the filing after that. So the shoe ain't dropped yet, folks. There's more here. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the plaintiffs, the seller's not really going to go into that. They say they bought something. They found out it was, when going through the property, the date October 27th, folks. That's the magical mystery date. That's the day they bought the auction, or they bought the house, the unit. Which means that, it was like a month later. It was not a month. It was like a week later that it showed up on eBay. These guys moved way too fast. Mm-hmm. And that sort of jives with the Google search and the not talking to a lawyer instead of reaching out. Instead, they reached out, and I can understand why they did this. Okay. It's like inheriting an expensive house and not knowing what it's worth. You trust your realtor. Well, we all know as adults, you shouldn't do that, but that's what they did. When going through the property, they found Hollywood film and memorabilia, including the Starship from Star Trek. It appeared authentic, and online research indicated that the Whoosh Starship had been lost since 1979. I want to point out that this clearly shows they knew the model was lost during that initial Google search that was mentioned in the Los Angeles Times article, or was that Los Angeles Times? So the statement in that article, this contradicts that. They knew this before. It also means they knew about the model being lost before anybody started letter bombing them on eBay. There have been a lot of people claiming I was the one who found it. I was the one that pointed them. We saw a lot of that. I put them in touch with these people. And so, no, you didn't. The date's pretty self-evident here. Your emails, your contacts, your comments helped them a heck of a lot. Okay, because it was obvious they didn't know what they were doing. So everybody who reached out to them, thank you. And yes, the world should recognize that a lot of Star Trek fans, the guys on Trek BBS, were really helpful in this. 100%. Okay, you guys know who you are. And I wish I could remember the names off the top, but for those of you who want more information, go back and look at the first video that I did in the series when the auction broke that night. And I published the video the following morning after staying up all night trying to collect facts from very few people that were willing to talk. Okay. I did some screenshots. There's some people there. Those names are screen names and not real names, but they talk about that. And yes, they were definitely instrumental, but they were not the dividing solution here. The decision had already been made. They contacted Heritage, most tech savvy memorabilia auction house, sales in the billions, all true, I'm sure. Heritage routed the call to Chains. What does that mean? That means they called the stupid switchboard. They called the receptionist out front, and the receptionist tapped the next guy, Chum Lee, to come out of the back. They provided the Starship, the bill of sale, and Trekkie chatter with proof that the Starship was loaned and lost in 1979 by creator-producer Gene Roddenberry, deceased. We're going to see the date that this happened, so you'll have some idea. He also provided info that Roddenberry's son, Eugene Roddenberry, was keenly interested in recovering the Starship. I think everybody knew that because like the very day of the auction, that came out. Rach agreed with Chains' recommendation. Catch this. The recommendation from Heritage. This baby goes on auction as quickly as we can. And they made the arrangement to put it on auction in the July auction. They were intending to sell it. Okay. Heritage's initial intent had nothing to do with, we found the stolen product. Right. We found something. Their original intention was let's auction this baby off.
Yep.
And that was the agreement that they entered into with the sellers. And that agreement is reproduced, as we'll see as we go down here. It's reproduced in the exhibit. It's a very straightforward agreement. And that agreement is at the heart of this lawsuit. And they actually say, hey, the contract that he signed is there. This is where things take a sinister turn. And again, these are allegations. Read the little streaming bar at the bottom of the screen. Jim wants to make sure that nobody gets the impression that Jim says these people are evil or that laws were broken. These are the allegations. They prove to be fascinating.
Yep.
Chains notified his boss, Heritage VP Joe Magdalena. No kidding. I would have known. I would have had my boss on the floor instantly. He notifies Magdalena after the consignment is signed that he had the Starship and the agreement in hand. Hey, Joe, I got the ship. I got the agreement. We're set. Can you imagine? You just auctioned a TIE fighter for $3 million. Imagine what this is going to get.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where things take a turn. Heritage's interests were better served pleasing Rod Roddenberry, CEO of Roddenberry Enterprises, Inc., REI, from this point forward, as this represented a PR bonanza and a pipeline of Hollywood memorabilia, much better than the plaintiff's one-off transaction, which was already in the bag and of no continuing use to Heritage.
Mm-hmm.
Allegation again, but they're saying, hey, they can make a back channel deal with Roddenberry. So here's what happens next. Magdalena instructs Chains to lower the expectations of the sellers while he works on a private deal with Rod. While Magdalena self-dealt with Rod, Chains self-dealt with talking Rach down, providing legal opinion that REI had a, quote, strong claim, unquote, and would tie them up with its, quote, powerful legal team, unquote. These are things that Rod never threatened, never uttered. The public auction was now off the table, according to Chains. Chains convinced Rach that the very best the legal team could negotiate was $500,000 for a model that he had told them was probably going to sell for more than $1 million, but was appraised at $800,000.
Right.
So here is the crux here. All right. It is fundamental that an agent can only serve one master. And this is actually really timely, because if you've been following the real estate thing, the whole concept of buyer's agent versus the realtor, This is the same argument they're having right now with that. The agent can serve one master and one master only, and that is Heritage owes their guidance and support or whatever to the consigner, not to a potential buyer or to somebody who's not even in the discussion. All right, so they're saying that Heritage and Chains broke that trust by saying hey, your title is questionable, okay, which they say is false. I don't know about that, to be perfectly honest. I think questionable, I think, is a valid, they didn't say your title, your claim is moot, but I think questionable's there, okay? Withholding communications, offers, and discussions with the buyers. This is really key in what they're going to talk about below here. Affirmatively representing the value at $500,000, knowing it was worth much more. Here's the other interesting thing was stating that the sale was $500,000, knowing that they had already reached a tentative deal with REI for $600,000.
Right.
Representing suppressing their actual belief that if it had been auctioned the way Chains had presented, it would have sold for far more than $1 million. Yes. I think it's really interesting. They're saying here that in these documents that we're going to see, and the communication that came back from Heritage was, take the $500,000. This is a good deal.
Right.
The quote, this is a priceless artifact that could go for anything, that Joe Magdalena made in the press release in mid-April. That quote's nowhere to be seen during this time frame. Failing to promote and market the Starship as promised to maximize the value of plaintiffs without self-interest. They should have listed it for the July auction. We would have known within a week of the eBay auction that this thing was going to go up for auction again. Right. But Heritage never uttered a word about having had it given to them for consignment. They had every right to post it and publicize it and drum up business for the auction, and they were quiet about the whole time. And we know that's a fact because we were begging, where's everybody going?
Yep.
Thus, Heritage and Chains willingly defrauded Rach and Rivas by affirmatively telling them the best price achievable was $500,000, when the true opinion was the live promoting auction noted in the consignment agreement would be more than $1 million. 16, Chains concealed the fact that Executive Magdalena was working with it directly and had a $600,000 reward with sensational press release worked out for Heritage and Rod. Interesting, and it's going to come back here in a minute. It wasn't a sale.
Right.
It's a reward.
Yep.
Magdalena turned it over to Heritage attorneys to work out the details. Heritage's attorneys, however, could not participate in actively tricking a Heritage client without violating independent ethical duties to their respective state bars. This is really fascinating here. They approached this dilemma by assigning staffer Nikki Hale, along with Chains, to manipulate Rach and Rivas according to their instructions, thus avoiding direct contact with the client victims. So what the sellers are saying is the lawyers knew this was wrong, and they knew that if they were directly involved, that they could get disbarred. That's the seller's accusation. If that statement is true, if the lawyers knew it was wrong, they are correct. They would have been disbarred. So the solution was, we go to our PA. I'm assuming she was a PA. It doesn't even say that. She just identifies her as a staffer. But they go to their PA and they say, here's what you do. You talk to these folks instead of us. We'll tell you what to say, but you talk to these folks. You can't get disbarred.
Right.
You can say whatever you want, whatever we told you to, and we won't have it in writing anywhere. Key, and we won't get disbarred. That's the allegation. Hale then introduces herself to Rach as representing the legal department. She and Chains reported that Heritage lawyers were negotiating the best deal they could for the plaintiffs, with texts coming from, and these texts unfortunately are not included in the filing, quote, our legal team is negotiating. And finally, quote, we have a deal. And then final quote, waiting on paperwork. The paperwork was supposed to release the Starship to REI for $500,000. Chains had opined that the price was right. On March 1st, 2024, Hale emailed release, presenting it as being from REI, from Roddenberry, stating, "We just sent both you and Jason separate email documents for each of your signatures. Please look for yours and alert Jason to look for it to sign the release. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks." Excuse me. This is March 1st. This is the first legal document that's been presented to the buyers to sign since November 2nd, when they approached our friends at Heritage. Attached here is Exhibit 2. We'll read that through here. We'll scan through that. But I do really... Okay, so we're getting into some interesting things here. Okay. They attacked his Exhibit 2, which they believed also Chains and Hales represented was the deal counsel was working out with REI on their behalf. In other words, their lawyer today is saying, you said Heritage's lawyers negotiated this in good faith and you were representing me. So I didn't question it because you had a legal team and you were my agent.
Yep.
Again, naive guys. You should have had a lawyer. Okay. Relying on Heritage being their exclusive agent would report its attorneys were negotiating the best deal with them with no notice. Best deal with them. But with no notice, Heritage was amending its consignment agreement. They had no inkling of foul play, did not scrutinize, nor engage separate counsel to review the release. Dudes, it was appraised at $800,000 and would probably sell for over $1 million, is what Chains told you on day one. Right. You still should have had a lawyer at this point.
Yep.
Plaintiffs accepted Heritage's advice and disclaimed title of the Starship. In exchange for, quote, timely, unquote, payment of $500,000, believing this is the best price and private deal was their only option, knowingly false statements. Heritage's modification of the consignment agreement with their fiduciary was voidable, if not void, as this, quote, sea change, unquote, and I do not know what that refers to. And yes, Jim, you should have Googled that. You just criticized the sellers for not doing it. I should have done the same thing. I apologize. I don't know. But it said legal relationship had to be stated clearly and plainly to the layperson's clients. This paragraph sounds to me like they're just simply saying that they made changes and they were supposed to be very transparent and clear about them and weren't. Right. Release was an instrument of deception. It was not with REI. It asserted a non-existent dispute with Heritage, which may be settled by payment of $500,000 in exchange for dropping any title claim that they might have, and an exculpation for Heritage's various undisclosed wrongdoings as an agent. Thus, it is void based on breach of fiduciary and fraud. We'll see that release. But what's really interesting is everybody calls it release, but you'll see it in a minute. It's settlement. It was a legal settlement between Heritage and REI.
Yep.
That just doesn't fit well. I will be fascinated to see what Heritage's response to this is. For different reasons, Heritage's lawyers cannot be used to trick clients, as it violates both Texas and California attorney ethical rules, as lawyers cannot be the instrument of fraud to fiduciary and clients, regardless of deploying a stooge, also avoiding the whole release at a minimum with exculpatory provisions. I guess, guys, stooge is a legal term. I never heard that. Thus, the release, or at least the exculpatory provisions, are all void due to not disclosing its conflict as required by Texas and California ethical rules. Also, because Heritage never revealed it was backing out of the consignment agreement in order to serve REI's interests, and never disclosed the various promises it had made that benefit Heritage REI at the plaintiff's expense. Keep in mind, they're saying right now, you backed out of the auction and agreed to a settlement and never even told us that that was a concern.
Yep.
So Heritage presents new and different terms it admits to misleading plaintiffs about the $500,000 value. There's an exhibit in this. Admits, I think, is a strong word. Anyhow, the agreement, the transfer agreement they're talking about. So we have the sale, or we have the Exhibit A, which is the consignment sale. Then we have the release, which is the settlement between Heritage and Rod, REI. And then we have this transfer agreement. Because keep in mind, the settlement release was between Heritage and REI.
Right.
Heritage had no ownership at this point. They had no ownership at any point up to this. At this point, they were the broker. So that's the other thing that's odd about this. The settlement should have been done between the buyers and REI. When they found when they found REI's transfer agreement, they discovered they weren't being told everything. They claimed they didn't know any of this. The real consideration was $600,000. That REI was the rightful owner. The plaintiffs were to indemnify REI. The plaintiffs were to indemnify Heritage. So, in other words, we own it. We're going to give you real consideration of $600,000. In exchange, you're not going to sue us. You're not going to talk bad about us. You're going to think we're just wonderful people. So they state that Heritage was a co-finder with the plaintiffs, getting a $100,000 reward rather than their $75,000 commission. I want to talk about this a little bit because keep in mind here that they were signed to sell an auction and they were going to get a commission based off the appraisal of $800,000 of $75,000. So they're going to walk away with $75,000. And you and I both know they would have got that in a heartbeat. Because they didn't commit the auction, they had to settle with REI. And that settlement is a surrender of property in exchange for a finder's fee. So now, as soon as they go that direction, they find themselves in a situation where they just lost their $75,000. They removed themselves from the table. This is why, for them to make any money at all on this, they needed to be the ones to claim the finder's fee. The finder fee didn't go to the buyers. It went to them, or to them and the buyers together. And oh, by the way, buyers, here's the $500,000 that we told you about, without mentioning up front, supposedly, that they carved 20% of that away for themselves and were keeping it over in the corner until they were forced to discuss it. Allegations, again. However, the documents clearly show that none of that communication was between the buyers and REI. It was only between Heritage and REI, and there's no documentation showing that it was ever communicated back to the buyers, at least not attached to the suit. Split payments over, this is interesting. The settlement splits the plaintiff's payments over 6 months rather than immediately and characterized the payment as a reward, which in all honesty makes it a gratuity and therefore potentially unenforceable. A reward is not a guarantee of payment.
Right.
It's really, really interesting because it is now May 7th when they filed this, and they haven't seen a penny for the Starship. Rach balked at signing the transfer agreement. He emailed Chains on the 8th of April. Look at this. I want to call somebody's attention to this. This is April 8th. Mm-hmm. They get the agreement, and they read out to these guys, and they say, hey, we read this transfer agreement, and it is not okay.
Right.
We worked out a deal with them, and we signed off on it already. We're supposed to receive timely payment. This is a changed deal. Okay? April 8th. April 15th, the press release went wide. Within 2 or 3 days of the press release, photos showed up. I did a video. Gary Kerr posted photos. The Akutas might have. Doug definitely posted photos. Heritage posted photos. All of those photos were taken on April 1st. 7 days before these guys even balked at signing the transfer agreement. Mm-hmm. So we know one thing is certain. The story that it had been found and was being given to Roddenberry and it was now his property again, it had been communicated to the public. That's what we were told on April 14th. And I'm certain that everybody that's in that photograph was completely unaware of what was going on.
Right.
100%. There's no way anyone that we saw in that photograph, other than a Heritage employee, was aware of the drama that was going on behind the scenes, and that the buyers were balking at signing to give this thing to Roddenberry at that point.
Right.
I have a big problem with that. And the problem I have with that, Roger, is I love our Star Trek family.
Mm-hmm.
I've never met Mike. I've never met so many of them. I've never met Doug. I've never met any of these people. And I hope to desperately, before I die one day,
Right.
meet them. Absolutely. Never in a bazillion years would they've gone near this thing with a 10-foot pole.
Right.
If they knew that while they were there on April 1st, that there was still an ongoing dispute
Exactly.
over whether or not it was actually going to be transferred legally over. Okay.
Exactly.
So I have no doubt they knew nothing. And I want that very, very clear from anyone who watches this. The words that come out of my mouth. Okay. No one that spoke to us, Gary Kerr, Doug Drexler, Micah, no one had any clue what was going on here.
Yep, I agree. Totally.
Not part of any of this. Okay. But the timing that they gave us, hey, we took this back on April 1st. The timing they gave us corroborates timing in the complaint.
Yep.
Doesn't mean the complaint's true. We haven't seen the response yet from Heritage.
Right.
But we do know for a fact now, things weren't signed when the pictures were taken. And the story that was released with the pictures 2 weeks later was it was a done deal.
Yep.
All right. Moving right along. Thank you for your help. Heritage response, it was required they had to get paid. Thus, it violates their own release. So, in other words, they said, Rach was told, you got to sign it, period. You got to do this. On April 18th, excuse me, I keep saying the 15th. Sorry, it's probably because it was tax day. On April 18th, Magdalena and Rod held a joint press release which positioned Heritage as the owner, as the hero finder who sought to do the right thing rather than sell the Starship. Magdalena admitted Heritage could, quote, have promoted and sold it for $1 million or more if it's not priceless. This is a true statement. We all saw it. We all read the articles. I made a video on it. So yes, everybody here was busy. We were all patting everybody on the back for, man, they stood up and they did the right thing. And I even remember, I might have said it in one of my videos, but I know it was one thing, and I hope they give them a good finder's fee, because that was the way it was proposed. It was being surrendered back to them. No sale was mentioned. It was going back to, it was now home with Rod Roddenberry again. And I remember thinking to myself, I hope they gave them good money. Did I dream that they even got $500,000? No, because I want to tell you something. It's real easy for us to look at Roddenberry Entertainment and go, oh man, Star Trek is worth, billions probably by this point. You need to talk about liquid capital, guys. If you think that Rod Roddenberry's got $1 million plus sitting around in a cash account somewhere, Roddenberry Enterprises does, you've never really seen even a medium-sized business before.
Yeah.
They probably do have liquid assets that could be liquidated. But in the case of even coughing up 500,000, I can tell you that was a substantial amount.
Yes.
Rod agreed to 600,000 to Heritage. Okay, forget the 500. Let's go with the 6. Rod was more, in my opinion, than honorable in this. That amount was like far more than I would have dreamed they would have gotten as part of a finder's fee in total. All right. Thus, for disadvantaging plaintiffs in money and legal rights, Heritage reaped a PR windfall, ingratiated itself to Rod, and was paid an extra $25,000, and on information and belief, secured future favoritism from REI. Plaintiffs requested Heritage's communications. So we said, you know what? The seller said, we want to see all of the documents relating to this conversation that just took place. And at the same time that they did, they also suggested, which means they talked to a lawyer, probably this Washington dude that wrote this, or respected mediators for a confidential mediation.
Yep.
So they knew right there And this is the April, this is the March, or this is somewhere between April 8th and April 16th or whatever, that week or whatever, that this was going sideways, and they were asking basically for discovery documents. Right. Show me what your communication was, and we agree to arbitration. And here's 4 people that we'll agree to.
Yep.
On the 28th of April, plaintiffs sent Exhibit 4 under Texas Unfair Trade Practice notices again, requesting the $500,000, identifying the unfair, deceptive, and fraudulent practices, and requesting resolution and offer to conduct private mediations. To the filing of this complaint, there's been more stalling without any attempt to understand or resolve the dispute. Again, allegation. All right. So now they're going to talk about what they want. Here's all you need to know. They want their money. They want punitive damages, and they want fiduciary damages. They say they've been damaged 3 ways. They've been damaged in value. The device was actually appraised and insured by Heritage, by the way, for $800,000, and that insurance is documented in here as well. Yep. So here's an $800,000 item that they only got $500,000 for. Then there's punitive damages because they feel that there's malicious intent that they have to prove here, and fiduciary damages, breach of contract, which is the whole purpose of this lawsuit.
Right.
So there's no money cap on this. This is an unlimited settlement lawsuit thing that can happen here. Let's keep going here. Said the defendants did not make any conflicts disclosure and violate ethical rules by use of non-lawyers, and it has no bearing on these duties that the Heritage fiduciaries, including the plaintiffs. Heritage represented best deal was $500, knowing they were getting $600. Keep going because they're repeating themselves, and this is the way the law works, guys. Yep. When Roger and I went through this earlier this week, there's a section that just goes over and over and over again.
Yep.
So I'm going to move down a little bit further. We're going to head our way into the exhibits real quick. Then we're going to go back to discussion because we're almost where you guys need to be. Yeah. And this is where they repeat themselves over. They want general and special damages in the amount according to proof, non-economic damages for costs of the suit herein incurred, for attorney fees pursuant to broad contractual indemnity provision, for punitive damages, and for such and other further relief the court may deem proper. In other words, they want whatever unlimited liability they can get in getting a judgment. Again, common sense. I'd ask for the same thing. I'm not going to get it, but right. Hey, that's how you begin the judgment discussion.
Yep.
May 7th. All right. Here's some of the things that we find here. All right. Oh, really, Jim? Hold on. Okay. So here is the consignment agreement that they signed with Heritage. And really, and here's where we found here. You know, they agreed to 50. They came down from 20% to 15% for their commission. So this is interesting if you ever wanted to know. Heritage's standard commission rate, 20% of the selling price. Man, that X-Wing was profitable, wasn't it? The other thing we got down here is that they have the appraisal. And notice that it is required to be fully insured at the appraised value. And the sellers had to pay for that, $800,000. Okay, look at the date, guys. November 2nd. This was like what, 4 days after they bought it, and within probably 24 hours or whatever of the eBay. I mean, the from the eBay auction to Heritage was entirely too rushed. Yep. And this date clearly shows that they ran right to Heritage. Hope they learned their lesson.
Yes.
I keep going. I'm not going to get into general current terms and conditions because this is the boilerplate on all their auctions. There's nothing date related there interesting. An addendum on the same day. This is where they made the changes, I guess, to their default. 15% seller's commission, no photo fee, no buyback fee. Don't know what that is. Heritage will front any relocation fees to be deducted from the net proceeds. So if this thing sells at auction, Heritage will pay whatever it costs to get it where it needs to be in exchange for being able to recover those costs from the proceeds. Normal. If item must be withdrawn for legal reasons, there will be no costs or penalties to the consignor. So if anything legal comes up in all this and it has to be done, the consignor, the buyers can walk away without having to pay anything. Again, this is all on November 2nd.
Yep.
Then on the 22nd, they get this release. They remitted to Heritage custody in advance of its intended sale, the model. Heritage assumed possession and control. Subsequent to Heritage's assumption of possession and control of the property, Heritage was notified of a claim of title. So Heritage is saying that REI or somebody claimed title on the model. I think that's very possible. We were all talking about it. Okay. Whereas the parties wish to effectuate the return of the property and settle the disputes and controversies between and among them, and thereby avoid the cost, the burdens, and uncertainty of a proceeding and or litigation between the parties, except as expressly reserved in this agreement. Keep in mind, there was never any conversation, threat or otherwise, between REI and the buyers. So this is one of the things they have an issue with. But this thing, if they sign it, this thing is, you get out of jail free card. This is the legal document here that says this, Heritage, what I'm going to do next, I can do because these guys signed it. We already know from their earlier statements, they did not review this. Performance by Heritage. Upon receipt of this signed agreement, they will return the property to the title claimant. Upon receipt of the sign, they will timely remit compensation for the property to Rick, totaling $500,000 in a manner agreed to by the parties. Timely remission. I think they've already missed that. But that's not a legally defined term.
Right.
Performance by Rach and Rivas. They hereby release, relinquish, and forever disclaim all right, title, and interest in the property. Rach and Rivas covenant and agree that any claim to the right, title, or interest of the property has been extinguished and rendered a nullity by the terms of this agreement. This is a typical settlement, guys. In other words, this is what is it? You do something with prejudice, without what prejudice. Can't remember which way it is, but it basically means you have no legal recourse after you sign this.
Right.
Covenant not to sue. Don't sue me. We're happy with this signed. Adequacy of consideration. The consideration recited in previously provided agreement is the sole and only consideration. Confidentiality and non-disparagement. I'm glad I took the time to read this because we need to talk about this. This document, ladies and gentlemen, is a publicly available document. You can go right to the Los Angeles Superior Court and pay a fee, $32, and they will give you all of these documents for you to download. This is all public material. Nothing that you're looking at here is confidential or protected in any way or bears any type of warning. This is just their complaint. I just thought I'd get that out there. I should have mentioned it earlier. Mutual warranty for competency, whatever. Advice of counsel, waiver and amendment, integration, general. Okay, here's the sticky part, guys. Right there. Dustin signed it on 3/21. Jason signed it on 3/22. So here's where things get dicey. They signed it saying they did not realize. They're saying that it's when they got this when they got this document and the subsequent release that we're going to see in a minute, that they realized that the things in it didn't match what they'd been told. That's their allegations. Okay. But they signed it.
Yep.
Naive. Oh, children, don't do that.
That goes back to not having a lawyer.
This then is the follow-up document that was sent to them, they said, on the 25th, although it's not dated.
Right.
And this one is where you clearly see here that the agreement is solely between REI, hold on a second, because it does actually say is entered into as of by Rodman Entertainment, Dustin and Ravis for sole purpose of sections 2, 3, and 5 through 14. Heritage were respect to the transfer and together Heritage Galleries and together with REI and Finder each party. Okay. REI, successor of interest to Gene Roddenberry, is the owner of the model. Finder located the model and is currently in possession of Heritage. That's true. Heritage is Finder as an agent of the Finder has facilitated the return of the model to REI, its rightful owner. That's true. Whereas the effective date the parties hereto desire to return the model to REI and reconvey all of its rights, titles, and interest in the model, remunerate the Finder for his efforts. That's the reward. Release any and all claims, rights, or obligations. And then it says, here's what we're going to do. And this is the effective, irrevocable, and fully binding. As of the effective date, no date on, here yet. Finder relinquishes all rights to the model, transfers and assigns and delivers to REI the physical possession. We have a right to do. Okay, so far so good. Payment of Finder's fee. Upon satisfaction of this conditions precedent, REI shall pay the Finder an aggregate amount equal to $600,000 in 2 equal installments. The first installment shall be payable within 5 business days upon the latter of receipt by REI of the agreement executed by parties, and Y, receipt of the model in conditions. We know that Rod got the model on the 18th of April because that's when the public statement was made where he said, and we saw the photograph of him and Magdalena there. So we know that $300,000 was contracted to go between REI and Heritage within a week of that. Mutual statement, mutual releases, waiver of other claims, leave me alone, don't sue me, I don't make any other claims. So, dispute, authentic. Finder has not, I thought this was interesting. Finder has not restored, repaired, or altered any part of the model, nor consented hereto, and no other party has performed any restoration, repair, or alteration. This has the potential to back the whole deal out if somebody wanted to. It's obvious the model's been altered. Yep. The epoxy seams that we've talked about and stuff like that. So it's interesting that a condition of this settlement and transfer of agreement is that, the Finder doesn't do it, and nor any other party has performed any restoration, repair, or alteration. Right. It's obvious they have. So I find this one a really interesting piece. Jim Jam, sorry to see you go, but fully understand. Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all of you that are out there. Michelle, if you're still on there, Happy Mother's Day. All right. This is what Heritage says. It's authentic. They have not restored, repaired, or altered any part of the model. That makes sense. Okay. Nobody's going to say anything nasty about anybody. Attorney's fees, indemnification, covenant not to sue. Well, we saw how far that covenant went. Okay. REI. The reason it's redacted is these are public documents. So PII information is removed, like addresses and home addresses and stuff. No admission. No admission. This is your typical settlement. Nobody's admitting to do anything wrong.
Yep.
All right. We are approaching the end of this conversation, guys, but notice this document has not been signed. This is the document that on April 8th, Rach and Rivas contacted and said, we will not sign. So this is the document that was presented to them a week after the shots were taken and the authentication was taken. And theoretically, Rod was already in possession of the model. I can't imagine Rod went to Beverly Hills on April 1st, stood around and took pictures with everybody, and then did not take the model with him.
Right.
He had no reason not to.
Right.
But this was never signed. It was never authenticated, and therefore is not in force. This is the item that's being contested. And in all honesty, all my comments about the modification just went right out the window. They never signed this. This is not an enforceable document yet.
Right.
And I think Rodman Entertainment. I think this is probably it. These are their affidavits that have to be what do you call a notary public. Now, this is interesting. This is the note that their lawyer sent the lawyer for Heritage. On or about November 2nd, Heritage was hired by Rach to authenticate, appraise, promote, and sell the Star Trek model by its renowned online auction. Heritage executive Joe Magdalena entered the deal behind the scenes. He recognized the value of the model as Star Trek franchisee owner Roddenberry Entertainment and set out to enhance his and Heritage's prestige to Rod without regard to detriment to principals Rach and Rivas. While Magdalena self-dealt with Rod, Rach and Rivas advisor Brian Chains talked Rach down with suggestions that REI had a strong claim and a powerful legal team, pushing them to accept $500,000 without revealing Heritage's true assessment that Rach and Rivas had a clear title and that the model was well and worth in excess of $100,000. Magdalena then turned it over to Heritage attorneys to write up. Heritage attorneys knew they could not ethically nor legally modify the agreement without disclosing the content of negotiations and making sure the plaintiffs had, obtained independent advice. Therefore, they instead assigned a non-lawyer, Nikki Hale, as a front man to avoid directly and personally violating Texas and California ethical rules. Hale told Rach and Rivas our legal team was negotiating with Roddenberry and then sent a release which we presented as being from REI stating, we just both sent you those documents to sign. These and other instances of ethical violation, fraud, and self-dealing mean the settlement and release is voidable, if not void, under California and Texas law, while also violating the Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act. To this known point, Heritage remained silent other than issuing public boasts about being a hero, and they knew they could have easily sold it for $1 million, if not more, as it's priceless, all the while failing to pay even the $500,000 that they had promised their own clients. Thus, we have no dispute with Roddenberry. This is very, very clear.
Yeah.
They do not have a dispute with Roddenberry. They do not say that Rod did anything. REI is blameless in this. It is Heritage act unethically and illegally to the principal's detriment. I propose a confidential mediation. While the safe harbor period on this letter runs, if it's not agreeable, we will file a suit in Los Angeles, Fort Worth. What is the date on this? So they sent that to them. It looks like they waited for about a week from the 28th to the 2nd, maybe 10 days, and not hearing a response, filed the suit. Yep. So, okay. So that, and I'm going to close this window. That's the lawsuits. Let's scroll back through the list here as we get ready to wrap up this call and determine if there's anything we need to discuss or anything that I botched as I went along the way, guys. I'm sorry. Let's see what we got. So the auction house needed to get it out of their hands ASAP. That's why the seller's making hay about this and exposing themselves to having been in possession of stolen property. That's one take on it. Yeah, absolutely. They want Spock is dead right here. I mean, there's no altruism here. Okay, this is money. Okay, and in all honesty, if I were one member of this party, it would be about money. We are talking about so much money. We are talking about life-changing money.
Yep.
So, absolutely, call it greed, call it avarice, call it whatever you want. It's obvious at this point that all parties are in this for every penny they can get out of it. They should have foreseen that from the beginning, and I probably would have acted the exact same way.
Jim, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to recall from my memory, is there any other TOS original props that have gone for over $1 million in sales at auction? Do you recall anything going that high?
Nothing as far as I know off the top of my head. The items that would have been the Christie stuff. I mean, Enterprise D went for like $700,000 back in '96 or whenever it happened. Right. But the resale items that have happened since then, phasers and things like that, I don't remember going over $1 million. The Klingons have never been put up for auction. because one of them is, let me rephrase that. Hold on a second.
Yeah,
I take that back. I'm sorry. And they went for 65,000. I think Michael Allen paid 65,000. I did a video on that one.
Yeah,
there's actually a video for those of you interested in it. There's a video on my channel about what was at the time the top 10 most expensive items ever auctioned off in Star Trek, and what incredibly inflated prices these were. None of them broke $1 million, but as they go back 20, 30 years now, Enterprise D would definitely fetch more than $1 million. It probably would fetch between 3 and 5 million, I think, in today's market.
Yep.
Should Bezos ever want to sell it? I think it's Bezos that has it. I don't think he will. Heck, I even think Deep Space Nine would probably clear $1 million now, and that's in his in the lobby of his thing.
And that's my point. If this model 3-foot model had gone to auction, or does go to auction at some point, which I doubt, hopefully won't. I mean, if Roddenberry gets it, but had it gone to auction, this could easily have been the most expensive TOS prop ever sold. Star Trek.
I believe it would have eclipsed the X-wing model. The 3.
I do too. I think it's more in the line of fire.
This one is, in my opinion, which is worth not even 25 cents. Or probably the most expensive, most significant find in television science, in television history. Period. I can't think of a single other television prop that ever could have approached something like this.
Agreed.
And keep in mind that for those of you who follow some of my other channels, which I don't really do a whole lot of because I'm concentrating with you folks there, but I did a story on Trilogy of Terror by Dan Curtis. One of the hero dolls from Trilogy of Terror went for $200,000 a couple of years back. So there's a good market on TV memorabilia, even if it's not something as culturally iconic as the Enterprise. Although I do have to admit, for all of us that are Gen 1, we saw Trilogy of Terror. Every last one of us knows what that doll looks like. Every last one of us remembers that movie, and that's why it got $200,000.
Yep. Even the Hero recent video you did on the Hero phaser, where they put one person had phaser 1, the other one had phaser 2, and they put them together, and I think that sold for $250,000,
like 230 or something like that. And of course, there have been detractors. There's a lot of people who have alleged fraud in these things, but the problem is, if it sells at auction and there's no lawsuit, then there's no legal proof of fraud.
Exactly.
You can say all you want that as an armchair quarterback that is definitely not a phaser 2. Well, no, you can't prove that in a court of law, because I guarantee you, if you could, the poor sap who paid $230,000, he'd be back in court right now over it. Nobody spends that much money on an item, and then discovers that it can be proven to be fake. So there's a lot of stuff that gets questioned, and I generally stay out of that argument because I can't I'm not anywhere near qualified as so many of the friends I'm hoping to meet at Wonderfest in 3 weeks, that breathe this stuff inside and out. And many of them might even feel, that phaser was not what we were told it was. But being able to legally prove that the provenance is wrong is a different story. And if they could, there'll be a lawsuit. It's all about the money. It's just like this is here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And yes, Stephen, see, I know I've talked quite a bit since there, but yes, that is literally the buyers are saying, hey, we got ripped off. I want more money. Could the model makers actually made 2 models? Really interesting. Dale, nobody's ever asked me that before. And it's really, really interesting. To the best of our knowledge, no, never happened. Richard Dayton was very, very explicit over the models that he made. Okay. And the thing to remember with the 33-inch model was 100% all Dayton. No Vollmer, none of the prop shop or Howard Anderson or anything. This was made by him in his wood shop on a lathe. Okay. So he never mentioned a second item. So I think that would have come up before now. But that's a great question.
It is a
long, long time. The average Star Trek fan, I mean, there were always people who knew, there were always people who were in the know, but we had no clue there were two Klingon models.
Right.
The fact that Stephen Poe had been given one by Roddenberry, and then he chose to hold on to it for 20 some years in his private collection, we didn't know he had that.
Right.
When the Klingon model was donated by Dorothy in 73, I think it was, right after she did Comic-Con, when it was donated to the Smithsonian on behalf of Desilu or whatever, we thought that was it.
Right.
They knew. Gene obviously knew. He gave the model to Poe, but it never came up. And
Right.
this is one of the biggest weaknesses we have in Star Trek today. And that is there's a lot out there that is known, but no one's ever asked the right question. Dale's question has
Right.
never been asked. And if it has been asked, it's never been asked in a forum where an official answer came back from somebody related to the Desilu years. Okay? So now we have that question in the back of our mind.
Yes.
Could there have been something? I don't think there was another model, but I will point out this. Dayton's daughter said something on, I believe it was Trek Movie, in the comments below. She said something after they ran the article talking about the discovery of the model, and I'm very thankful to them. They actually even they embedded my video on the model at the end of the video.
Right.
She said, no one's contacted me about authentication. Nobody's asked me a question. This was long after the November 2nd date, by the way, guys. She said, nobody's asked me a single thing about this. And I have spare material. I have leftover materials that my dad used that could be used to help authenticate this. And I'm literally, my head was spinning.
Wow.
Leftover materials from the construction of any of the original prompts.
Yep.
Where are those materials? And what are we going to do? What can we do about securing them?
Right.
So that is not the last public statement ever made concerning spare materials that no one ever commented on. Was it known by CBS and Paramount that they're there? Maybe. But again, until somebody makes an off-the-cuff comment like she did, when she passes, her tribal knowledge passes.
Right.
We lose so many people. When we lost Greg Jane, when we lost all of these people, the tribal knowledge they had. That, I began this call with, how did Greg not know he had an X-Wing in his closet or in his garage? Maybe he did. Nobody asked him.
Yeah.
Obviously, because he never said whether he had an X-Wing or not. And there's not a single incident anywhere where somebody asked him, do you know where the X-Wing is? And his response was no, because he wouldn't lie. So he didn't know it was there, and nobody asked him.
Right.
As crazy as that sounds. Because nobody ever asked that question. It becomes a major surprise after the man's died.
Absolutely.
I think every day so much Star Trek because we just didn't ask the right question.
Absolutely.
Asked the wrong question. Why was the left side of the Enterprise why is it there's nothing on it? Well, we had to drill holes through it and stuff like that. Good question, good answer. Dayton said it a million times, and yes, it's 100% accurate. But Dayton also said the day that he delivered it to Howard Anderson's, he thought he was done.
Yeah.
Delivered the models, and he thought he was done. And he said, in his notes in the biography, his daughter said it was as painted and on one side as it was on the other. Okay, not entirely 100% true. We don't know what happened. Why in the world the wood pieces were not on the left side? Because it's not likely that they were there and he removed them.
Right.
But we know from photographic evidence, it had windows, it had pinstripes, it had registry. So what does that mean? Does that mean Dayton lied? No. Does that mean that these people in like Trek BBS and these other places all lied about having conversations with Dayton? No. They asked a question, they got an answer. They didn't ask the right question.
Right.
And they didn't know to. I mean, I never thought of the question until I kept looking at it because I had literally just conducted email conversations with Gary Kerr. People that just blow my mind, guys. I feel like an ant when I talk to these guys, and they're absolutely wonderful to me when they talk to me, and I don't abuse that privilege, okay? But Gary had just sent some stuff to me, and sent me some AutoCAD drawings, some amazing things that I hope to be able to put in a video to show you guys later. You haven't seen, not because anybody hit them. They've been shown publicly. They were shown at Wonderfest about 7 years ago, but you won't find them searching on the internet right now for them.
Right.
So he had just told me that, and I didn't think to ask about it. But then he's telling me, Jim, they wouldn't spend a dime. The decals that were made in reverse, the real secret is they never used them.
Yeah.
They printed the numbers on paper, and they taped the paper over the nacelle, painted it the color of the nacelles. And then when they were done, they just ripped the paper off. That way they didn't have to remove the decals. They don't do anything without money. And then so I'm sitting there staring at the left side of the Enterprise while I'm getting ready to do one of my Enterprise videos going, if they never wasted a penny, why is the registry and the pennants why are they on the left-hand side nacelle that would never have been photographed? Why would they detail, however poorly and incomplete, why would it be there? And when I sent the question initially, I got a lot of ridicule out on the internet. Trek BBS can really give you some interesting comments that were made directly to me at that point. But then I didn't give up. I asked a question I thought nobody had been asked. I sent that question to Doug Drexler. And I said, is there ever been an existence of anything any photographic evidence that model one time was not completely and utterly blank? And he sent me back the photo I've had in several of my videos about the left side. And lo and behold, the video, the photo is crap. But there it is. The registry, the pennants, the windows, everything was there. The block was not. You could actually see where they had the photograph was taken during the Where No Man Has Gone Before clips. So you can actually see where, yes, they had already begun ripping into the left side of the model. Does that mean that Dayton and everybody on Earth lied to us about that side? No. It just means that no one had ever asked that question. And if they did, if somebody else had already asked that, Doug knew it. He went and he found the picture. I asked him a question. He goes, wait a minute. In his head. I can't speak for him. Okay. But he did this so quickly. He was on Orville season 3, but he responded to me within like an hour or so during the middle of his work day. Okay. With this photo. He had seen it. He knew. He even joked to me in the email. Says, yeah, I actually have that book you're talking about. I got it on my desk right now. For whatever reason, he had that book on his desk. He perused it for some reason. I don't know if he just bought it or what. But the point is, he knew. They didn't lie to us. They didn't hide it from us. No one ever asked him that.
Jim, I have a couple comments to make on that too.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. That's okay. First of all, I can't believe that there isn't someone who worked at Richard C. Dayton's shop that doesn't have some sort of black and white or production photos when they were creating that model, the 11-foot model, that just haven't come to light yet. I have to believe that somewhere there are photos that shows the left side, during production, maybe even before it left their shop. Somewhere there'll be photos turn up at some point down the road. I would hope. I know it's been 50, 60 years since then and nothing's popped up, but that doesn't mean they don't exist.
Real quick, hold on. Not to interrupt, but to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
Geek Filter, if you are still online, you are the folks that wrote the Taz book that was published a few years back. I would love to talk to you guys. Just putting that out there. There's a comment in the comments that says, that's why we wrote our Taz book. We wanted to capture as much knowledge as possible. So they're just echoing exactly what I just said. And I just love talking, even if I don't end up getting anything out of it that I can put in a video. It was my Taz video 3 years ago that introduced me to you guys.
Yep.
It was not a Star Trek channel. It was a channel about old TV shows I watched. I did videos on Love American Style. I did videos on Kolchak. And I did a video on Taz because a lot of people just seem to forget there was a Star Trek cartoon.
Yep.
And lo and behold, you guys came to me. And here I am 3 years later. I am tickled pink with this relationship. So Taz has a very special place in my heart. So Geek Filter, if you're still around, you can drop me a line at jim@trek-world.com. Leave a comment on this. And if you just want to be left alone, I appreciate that too. Like I said, I don't want to waste anybody's time, but I love talking to people. And I really, at one point, want to go back and do a much more in-depth video on Taz. And your book is effectively, it's the Bible on Taz at this point, because nobody documented anything. Absolutely nothing.
Yep. The other comment I wanted to make about the 11-foot model is that I personally believe, and from the photo you can tell, it was detailed on the left-hand side. And the reason I feel that it was originally from Dayton, how is Richard Dayton going to know what side they're going to shoot the model from? When he delivered it, it had to be a complete model because he had no idea knowing which side they were going to use to shoot from. Now, when I say that, I mean, at that point, it still had not been lighted. So by the time he delivered it, it should and would have been, I believe, detailed on both sides, on all sides, because for the plain and simple fact, he had no idea of knowing what side they were going to shoot from. Now, having said that, once the thing is lighted, then they're stuck shooting from the port or the starboard side, from the right side, because all the wiring is hanging out of the left side. As far as why the wood block on the front of the sensor, next to the sensor on the left side, was not there, I don't know. Maybe it was something that was taken off when they lighted it. Maybe for some reason they had to remove it for when they did the wiring for the lighting. I don't know. But to me, it makes perfect sense that it would have been fully detailed all the way around when it was originally delivered, for where no man has gone before, but for the cage, because nobody knew it was going to be lighted, and they had no idea. Dayton had no idea of knowing what side it was going to be shot or filmed from. So to me, that makes perfect sense that it would have had all the decals and everything on both sides.
The wood pieces puzzle me to this day.
Yeah.
Because I believe, for everything I've heard from people like Doug, there's no indication that block was ever there, and
right.
There's actually some pieces missing on the left side from where the nacelles are too.
Right.
But all I have is the written statement by Dayton in his notes that his daughter published, and the comments that he made to her.
Right.
That was those statements and questions that finally led me to Doug, because I figured there's no way they could have done the restoration in 2016,
right,
not having access to the largest library of information ever made on that model. So
right.
Surely someone had a conversation about it. And I think that definitely happened. I think everybody that was on that committee, the 16 people or whatever, every last one of them was probably aware of what Doug showed me.
Right.
And had no idea that we weren't.
Right.
The assumption that, hey, you guys didn't, you didn't, so.
Then having said that, I just now remembered in Adam Savage's video at the Smithsonian for the 2016 restoration, the curator points out the fact that the inside of the nacelle on the starboard side was never finished. So now I just contradict but then again, why would they have not finished that starboard side, but yet finished the decals and the markings on the port side? If they didn't know what side it was going to be filmed from.
Originally, what happened, the decal, the inside of the starboard side was never done because it wasn't going to get filmed because of the way it was. Right. But then there was a resultant set of videos, a set of shots that had to be done for the Trouble with Tribbles, which for the very first time had to show us in between. So they ended up doing like a decal to make it look like there had been some work done on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, all I know for a fact is that Dayton was dead set. I'm done.
Yeah.
I've delivered these models. He then goes from Star Trek to Petticoat Junction and stuff like that. But I mean, he figured he was done. He had asked Gene repeatedly,
right,
to be lit, and Gene goes, absolutely not. They're unlit. And then of course he brings the model back the first time in the cage, and Gene goes, I want some lights in it. Just after he delivers it with no lights, Gene says, I want some lights in it.
Yep.
He picks it up and he takes it back and he puts in the first set of lights. The other thing that I found that was pretty interesting that I'll probably bring up in a video at some point I had always had the assumption that the nacelles were lit during modifications that were done between Where No Man Has Gone Before and when the television series started.
Right.
That is not the case. I have been given a private letter from Richard Dayton by Paul Newitt, a friend of mine that again I met through this channel, and he was on here earlier. I don't know if Paul's still on it or not. He has been Paul is like Gary and like Doug. He's Paul Newitt. I know the name. I've seen the photos. We wrote the books as a kid or whatever. But yep. Paul is one of the most human individuals I've ever met. At least in his interaction with me, I feel as comfortable with him as I feel with you, Roger. I mean, and I can't. I told you, you live so many states away. It's a shame yes. we're not closer. I would love to have dinner with Paul one night.
Oh, absolutely.
We've made a good enough connection, I think, person to person.
Paul cares enough. He's been very interactive with the channel on these. I mean, he's, of all the people that we could get on here, he has been very willing to
communicate more with me than I do with him, because I'm afraid, like I say, I try not to monopolize these people. Right. So if it weren't for that, there'd be many times I'd reach right back out to him when he gives me something.
Yes.
He gives me things and I file them away for when I think I can use them or when I need to make a comment, because he sent me some stuff in the past day or so, specifically in preparation for this very live stream.
Yes.
And I can't.
I
can't tell him how much, if he's still there or not, I don't know, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And I realize that I don't deserve it. And that makes it very precious to me when people reach out to me like that. And there's been a few Star Trek people that reached out to me that didn't have to.
Right.
But Paul is definitely one of the most personable people I've ever seen. And he's Gen 1, but more importantly, he goes all the way back to the Bay Area.
Yes.
The series was still on the air. There's only a handful of people that are from that time. And I have seen so many things associated with him. I am digging through Trek magazine last week because I have an addiction to old, out-of-date Star Trek stuff.
Who doesn't?
He has a wonderful interview he did with Franz Joseph. Yeah. And I sent him a text last night. I said, I want to do a video on that interview, and I'd like to actually get it so he can be on the call.
Yes.
Excuse me. He doesn't actually do video conferencing. So what I have to actually work into is I have to figure out how to do it just like an old-fashioned radio show. There is a way to set it up so that somebody can call me and, caller 10, you're on the air. Let's talk. And I want to do something like that. He has so much knowledge of that. And there's not very many people from that area and from that time still around. I mean, the only two people I talk to that are from that time and area in general is Paul, Michelle Evans, who was on earlier this evening. She's the one that gave me my first.
That's right.
My first big picture of the Galileo beautiful color picture in Heisman's Yard. And she nailed down the timeline for me for the very first time ever when she pointed out, I took this photograph in June of 75 or whatever year it was, and that hole where the brick went through was done a month prior. From that comment and that anchor point, I was able to go backwards and forwards in time and account for every day of the Galileo's life. And I would not have been able to do it without having a good anchor point. And by her giving me an anchor point while it was still in Heisman's Yard blew me away. I didn't think we were ever going to get that because Heisman, of course, has since disconnected.
Right.
So those people out there, there's not many of them left.
No, and they're amazing people. We are so lucky to have those folks be able to participate and provide details on this channel to the videos that you're doing. I mean, Michelle and Paul both, but Paul especially. I mean, to take the time to join our live streams and to contribute information in the chat. I mean, it is that's a gem. That's a gem for this channel, and we're so lucky to have that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I am so blessed. And I mean, Paul spent. Well, you've been on a couple of my marathon calls. Paul spent one night with me. I'm sure we were on the call for like 4.5, 5 hours. You don't even feel it.
No.
When you make that kind of connection with somebody, you don't even feel it. And I wanted a dozen times I've sent him something, through Messenger or something, saying, we need to talk. I need to call you. And it's like, well, it never works out. So, and it's all me. It's not him.
Yeah.
All right. We are approaching the top of the hour. We still got about 4.5 minutes left. We've been on now for 1 hour, 54 minutes. So we're going to get ready to go ahead and pass and sign off tonight. I just want to leave the chat open for just a few more moments. See if anybody has any more last minute questions. If you joined late and there's still a key piece of information that you wanted, go ahead and enter it in the chat and I'll answer it. But just to recoup, these are everything that we've done in this video is gone over the complaint that was filed by the sellers in court on May 7th, alleging that Heritage basically was a bad actor.
Right.
This is all the plaintiff's complaint. It's one half of a story, which is what my little dragging banner down there has been saying over and over again for the past 2 hours. It's one half of a story. We will not know 100% of the truth.
Right.
Jeremiah, no. CBS up to this point has not gotten involved. And I think if they did get involved, it would really begin to muddy the waters because they are the legitimate heirs to the license. They paid it. Okay. Desilu paid it. Paramount ended up buying Desilu, then CBS, Viacom buys Paramount. So it was CBS is the only one I think that could make a legal stand, but then it gets really sticky. Why have they not tried that with anything else?
Well, with their intellectual property that they've
Filter, I'm going to check that real quick while Roger talks.
Yep. What? So while Paramount steps in on, say, some of the fan-made productions and things with the intellectual properties, it surprises me that at this point they haven't stepped in. But again, maybe they're not fully aware. I find that hard to believe at this point, since there's legally there's been documents filed in court. I find it interesting and unbelievable that they have not stepped in at this point. I really do. But that's who knows. And that's to say it won't happen moving forward.
Well, especially considering the fact that CBS is desperately trying to sell Paramount right now.
Well, right. Yeah.
And unfortunately, if they get into it, does not necessarily mean that they're going to get into it as a party that is going to be friendly to Rod.
Well, that's very true. That's very true. Absolutely.
Geek Filter, I'm looking. I thought that one of the exhibits was the bill of sale, because they mentioned it in the complaint. I thought that one of them was the bill of sale when they bought the.
And I was thinking we had seen
storage unit.
Yeah.
But the first documents attached are all from Heritage. Then they have the settlement. So it's not listed in the complaint. I did get other documents, so bear with me for just one moment as I try to pull up and take a look here to see if there's anything that identifies which lot it was. I thought for sure I had seen it somewhere, but it's not part of the package that I got from the court. Sorry. It was something I thought I had, but I don't.
I thought we had seen it last night too, but maybe not. So
yeah. So the answer to your question, Jeremy, is Jeremiah, I think they could speak up, but I think it probably would not be that. It would not be beneficial to anybody, I think. And it would only be motivated for money, which is a possibility.
Oh, yeah.
Because we have no idea what the new owners are going to want to do. Right. Or if they want to get involved in negative publicity. Because remember how everybody reacted to the way that Paramount ended up handling, or CBS ended up handling the fan films situation.
Right.
In all honesty, they were protecting their copyright. You have to do something.
Right.
But historically and almost universally, they're vilified for it. And none of us, including me, are happy with the results. So I think them getting involved could actually buy them a lot of negative publicity.
Yes, I agree. The other thing, Jim, too, is CBS has never stepped in and been involved in any of the prop sales, as far as the hand, and those were given away or taken from the sets originally. So
Yeah,
You know,
people. Yeah, I mean the phaser sale. Supposedly, the person with the phaser one part of it said,
yeah,
he worked on Star Trek in the second season. And he took the prop home with him.
right.
I mean, so you're admitting, way past the statute of limitations. I'm sure you're not going to go to jail for it, but you're admitting you stole the prop off the set.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody did back then, probably. Nobody knew what this stuff was going to be worth in the 60s.
Well, in one of those videos in the 90s that they did on the Sci-Fi Channel that you showed, where you had the actors talking about, William Campbell talks about when they did the Trouble with Tribbles. He glommed onto a bunch of the Tribbles and took them home and gave them out to the kids in his neighborhood.
Yep. I think there were like 500 of them, something like that, when they did them.
Yeah. And then he came back and said, boy, I wish I had those now.
Just one. You could retire on just one now. One of the original. Okay, folks, I think our pumpkin is about ready. I mean, I think our chariot's about ready to turn back into a pumpkin again. For those of you who joined us here at Trek World for the first time, welcome. I very warmly invite you. Would love to have you back. Roger and I do watch-along parties. The next one is next Saturday at 4:00 Central. All of us will be watching Arena together, and we have conversations just like this. I have a series of videos that come out each week on a variety of things. I've currently got a series running on looking at oddities, bloopers, things that are, it's like 6 to 8 minute video on each individual episode of TOS. I am focusing predominantly on TOS right now, but I will be actually moving forward with one of my favorites is Deep Space Nine. We will be moving forward into what I consider to be Gen 2, which are the people that came on to Star Trek during Next Gen. So if you've never seen us before, subscribe so that you get that little notification thing when I do something, because the odds are you may not see it. And thank you for joining us today. And don't be strangers.
Right.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for a wonderful afternoon. And I will see you again soon.
Bye, all. Thanks again.